Hello, my name is Steve Bowler and I want to welcome you to the Ansible GNS3 Lab Setup Part 2 video. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to install Ansible on our Ubuntu server. That's going to be acting as our Ansible controller. And then we're going to also run you through how to execute a simple playbook. So there's a few tasks that we have to do to get up and running. And I want to show you the GitHub description of the lab. We're going to show you the installation of Ansible on the Ubuntu server, configuration of the Ansible Inventory, configuration of Ansible variables, the configuration and execution of the Ansible Playbook, and we're going to run Ansible Playbook against multiple Cisco devices. So I'm going to add into the video a link so you can get access to the GitHub account where we have our README file and our step-by-step guide so you can follow this tutorial. And so if you were with us in the last video, if not, you want to look for and watch the Ansible GNS3 Lab Setup Part 1 video. In this video, we showed you GNS3, how to install it, VMware Workstation, Ubuntu, and Cisco iOS. So we installed all those, we got everything up and running. And at the end of that lab, what we had is SSH access from the Ubuntu server to our routers. So this lab is part 2. This is the continuation. And what we're going to do now is get into Ansible. We're going to show you how to set it up and how to execute some simple playbooks. So the first thing we want to do is open GNS3, and we want to open the GNS3 Lab Setup Part 1, or whatever you named your GNS3 project from Part 1. So that's already done. I've already opened up GNS3. I have everything powered up. And so that's step number 2, is to power on all your devices. Make sure everything's green. And then step number 3, what we're going to do is we're going to verify that you can ping from the server to the Cisco devices. So if we go to our server, we'll go ahead and start with that. And then your IPs might be different than mine, but my devices are R1 is 158.200, and you can see I have a reply. 201, I have a reply, and that's R2, and then router 3 is 202. So as you can see, I have reachability from my Ubuntu server to all 3 of the routers that are in my setup, and I have them all named on the diagram so you can easily follow along. And the Ubuntu server itself is 158.128. Okay, so our next step is going to be to make note of the user account that we have on the Cisco devices. These are going to be added on later in our Ansible configuration when we're trying to access the devices while running the playbook. So we're going to set these up. So it's just a good note to verify what your username is. It might be different than mine, and your password as well. So my username was Steve, password was just password. Okay, so the next step is we're going to install Ansible on the Ubuntu server. So the first thing we want to do is run this command. And so let's go to our server. And so I've already done this, but I just want to show you. That way we kind of save some time in the lab. But this is the first command that you want to do if you're running Ubuntu desktop. And that's what I have running in this lab. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. You can see that the first step of the Ansible installation is running. So I'm going to go ahead and just pause the video while this completes. Because this can take some time. So we'll go ahead and pause this. Actually, looks like it's done. Okay, never mind. We're good. So we've already installed it, so this might not take as long, obviously. So let's go ahead and go to the next step. So that was step number 5, this apt add repository. So we're just installing the package. And then the next thing we want to do is the apt update command. So we'll go ahead and do that. And you can see that the update is running. We are downloading the packages that we need. So we'll go ahead and looks like all the packages are up to date and running. So the next step is we want to install Ansible. So apt install Ansible is the command. Very simple. Let's go back to our Ubuntu box, apt install Ansible. Okay, so as you can see, it shows Ansible is already on the newest version. So if you haven't done this before, this might take a little while. A couple of these steps, I've already kind of done them for you so that you don't have to wait. So we don't have to wait for that to happen. And then what we can do next is verify our Ansible installation by the Ansible -- version command. So we'll go ahead and do that. And this is just to verify that Ansible is indeed installed. So we'll see we're running Ansible core. We have the configuration file location under etc Ansible. And so we'll head on to the next step. And that's going to be to perform the list. And this is going to show us what files were created by default once we installed Ansible. So let's go back to the box. We'll do ls etc Ansible and then hit enter. And we have 3 files, the Ansible config, hosts, and roles. So what we are going to be doing in this lab is we're going to be focusing on the host file, and that's going to be the default location for our Ansible inventory. And we're going to talk about the inventory later on. Actually, we're going to talk about it, I believe, right now. So the inventories just help us organize and manage nodes in centralized files that provide Ansible with system information and network locations. So we can use an inventory file to manage a large number of hosts with a single command. And what I'm going to do now is add our routers 1, 2, and 3 from our setup. We're going to add these routers into our inventory file. So if you haven't already installed Vim, you can do that. It's easy, apt install Vim. I've already done that. So what I'm going to do is set up and show you the default inventory file. So let's go ahead and we'll just do a cat etc Ansible hosts. And what we can see is there are some examples that have been commented out, which means they're not running. They're not active. And it kind of gives us a little tutorial on what this file is and how to use it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add our 3 routers to this host file. And I'll do it under, I'll do it at the very end. You can do it wherever you want. Okay, so now that I'm inside the file, what I'm going to do is you can just go to the very end, and what I'm going to do is add, I'll name the, I'm going to give this a name. This is just going to be a collection of hosts belonging to the Cisco routers group. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so you're probably wondering, well, what is a group? Good question. So a group allows us to put multiple devices into one container so that when we run the playbook, we're going to call the group, and the group is going to run based upon what is inside of that variable. So we have the Cisco routers group, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to show R1, R2, and R3 inside that group. And so a group just allows us to put multiple nodes, our host endpoints, into one list. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we'll go to our file, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create this group. And we're going to name it Cisco _routers. Now you can name this whatever you want, but this name is very important because this is what we're going to be referencing when we define our playbook. We're going to be calling this group inside the default inventory file location, etc Ansible hosts. And this is going to basically tell our Ansible playbook what to try to connect to and run commands on. So R1 is going to be the alias, and that's going to be for the Ansible host 192.168.158.200, and I'll explain the Ansible _host in a second. So R2 is going to be 192.168.158.201, and then router 3 is going to be Ansible host 192.168.158.202. Okay, so now that we have our group defined inside our inventory file, let's go back and let's just recap what we did. We created the Cisco routers group, and that is what we're going to use to call inside our playbook creation later. R1 is the alias for the host with that IP address, and the Ansible _host allows us to define, followed by an IP address, allows us to define what host we are trying to identify. So R1 is the alias, and then that's going to be the alias, and we'll see this being used in the playbook with our output. So let's go ahead and create the variables. Now this list of variables is going to be used to tell Ansible how to use the credentials for all the devices inside the Cisco routers group. So think of it as an easy way, instead of having to put every single variable under each device. So R1, if I didn't create this group variables, then I would have to implicitly put in a statement under R1 for Ansible host. Then I'd have to put in Ansible network, Ansible user, Ansible password. And as you can see, doing that would create a lot more information inside the file that we need to actually put. So if we're using all of these variables for every single device, it makes sense for us to just create a group variable list that we can apply to these devices. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's give that a name. So we'll call it collection of variables used for the Cisco routers group. Okay. So Cisco underscore routers vars, that's our group variables. And then we're going to define what those are. So we'll do, the first one is going to be Ansible Network OS. And then this is basically, you know what? I'll explain all these after I put them in. Ansible user is going to be the user we use to connect to on the local device. Ansible Network OS is what type of system we're connecting to. In this case, it's Cisco iOS, so we define that as iOS. And then the Ansible password for the local account on the machine is going to be password, as we showed you earlier. And then the Ansible connection is going to be network CLI. So here, within the step-by-step guide, you can see I have all of this down just in case you need to reference exactly what's going on while you follow along and do this lab. It's all provided to you on the GitHub account. I'm going to put that inside the description on the video so you can reference and follow along. So again, the network OS matches the network platform you're communicating with, the user and password, pretty self-explanatory. Those are the credentials that I put on routers 1 through 3 when we set those up. And then the connection, Ansible connection, is the protocol port used to connect to the target host. So let's go ahead and save that file. Now that we have that file completed. And then we can verify that, the inventory, with the following command, Ansible-inventory-list. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so this shows us our inventory, R1. And again, this is why the group vars is very important. Instead of having to put all of these common variables for every single router, we just did it once under the group vars. So we can see R1 is 200, R2 is 201, and R3 is 202. Okay, so let's go back to the step-by-step guide. And the next step is going to be to verify reachability. We can do this with an Ansible command where we're just going to state Ansible and then our group, which is Cisco routers. We'll do a -m and then ping. So with this command, this is basically your first or our first Ansible command that we're using to communicate with the devices. And you can see that R1 is successful with the Pong. We have a ping and a Pong statement. So that means that Ansible has reachability to router 1, 2, and 3. So let's go back to the guide. And the next step is going to be to create our playbook. So the playbooks basically are the automation blueprints, and they are shown and configured in YAML format. And this is what Ansible uses to deploy and configure managed nodes, and can be further described as the following. So we have a play as an ordered list, a task, a module. We will go into all of these as we create the playbook. So the first thing that we want to do is give a playbook a name. and we're going to create the file. So we go into our Ubuntu server and we'll create the file under etc Ansible, and then we'll just call it Cisco Playbook.yaml. I believe that's the name that we want. And that is it. So let's go ahead, go back to, okay. So we've created a new file under Ansible, etc Ansible, called Cisco_Playbook.yaml. And every YAML file is going to be started with 3 dashes. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll go back to our playbook and we'll go ahead and start to configure it. So the first thing we want to do is give it a name or description. So we'll just put my first Cisco playbook. And in this first playbook, what we're going to do is we'll do a command just to show how long the router has been up. And then the hosts command, this is what we're talking about earlier, where we're going to reference our Cisco routers group, which was in the inventory file that we created, which contains our 1, 2, and 3. And then what Ansible does by default is it will gather facts and information on devices that you're trying to reach. We want to turn this off because we want to tell Ansible what we're basically defining what we want to come back as the output of our playbook. So we're going to tell Ansible exactly what we want to gather, that information. We don't need Ansible to do it for us. So it's a good tool to use, you know, if you're running servers or any other devices where you're just trying to gain some default information, some good baseline information, but we're not going to be doing that in this lab. Okay, so the task, this is going to be where we define our first play. So this is, let's go back to the device, to the Ubuntu server, and the task is where we're going to basically, we're going to get into, let's name it first. We'll just do this as the show uptime of the Cisco iOS routers. And then under name, we're going to do the command iOS command and commands. So this is going to be the command that we want to run. We want Ansible to run the command show version pipe to include uptime. And so if you've ever administered or managed a Cisco device, you know that this is a good command we can use to look at the uptime, how long the Cisco device has been up. And let's go ahead and look at the rest of the playbook. And you can see that once we run this command, we're going to register this output. And then we're going to give it, so that is our first play. Our second play is going to be called, this is where, so the first play is basically we're using the iOS_command module, and we're going to be running the show version command, and we're going to capture or register that as that output, and then we're going to run our second play, and this is going to be to print or display the output that we got in the first play. Okay, so let's go back to our step-by-step guide. The iOS, let's step back and just kind of go over this playbook that we created. The first thing is self-explanatory. We just use the name to describe the playbook. The hosts is where we called into our, or we tell Ansible to look at the Cisco underscore routers, which is our group of devices that we created, which have R1 through R3 inside of our inventory file. Gather facts, we kind of explained that already. We turn that off. And then the tasks, that is our first play that we're going to do. And so we're just going to give that a description, a name. And then we're going to call the iOS command module. And then we're going to use that command module to perform a Cisco command. We're going to save that output using the register statement. And then the debug is used to, under the second play, the debug prints statements during the playbook execution. And then the var, that's when it's used with std out is returned. Ansible always provides a list of strings. And so basically we have two plays. The first one to run the show command, the second one to give us the output of the show version command. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. And let's go ahead and see if we can run this playbook. So we do that with the command Ansible Playbook, and then we point it to where the YAML file that we created is located. So that's under etc, Ansible, and then Cisco Playbook. And we just hit enter. So you can see my first play is the output, the task. It shows the uptime of the Cisco iOS routers, and then the task is print display output. So what we have is two tasks here that we're running. The first one is to show the uptime, and then the second one is to actually print that, display it for us. So we can see that with the output of OK, that tells us that the command is successful. We have R2, it's showing us the output of the uptime of 2 hours and 58 minutes. For R2, R1 is 2 hours and 58 minutes as well, and R3 is 2 hours and 57 minutes. And then the play recap, it shows okay, so that's good. That's what we want to see when we're running these playbooks. And if we actually go into the routers themselves and do the command show version, you can see that R1 has been up for 2 hours and 59 minutes. So go to router 3, and you can see it's been up for 2 hours 58 minutes. So that's exactly what we're seeing when we run this Ansible playbook. We're seeing those exact results. So Ansible, this server is, by the playbook that we set up, it's going out via SSH, logging into the router, running the command, and then it's returning that output to the Ansible controller. So that's it. That's our first playbook that we've created. What I want to show you is just a couple more things that you can do with these playbooks. Now that we have seen and shown you what that looks like, the playbook, Let's go ahead and add another play to the playbook to include the version of the router as well. And so what we'll do is we'll just create another play and we'll call it show Cisco iOS version of routers. And we're going to add this to our playbook. So we'll go vim etc ansible cisco underscore playbook. And then we're just going to add these two tasks. Okay, so let's go ahead and add this here. So we'll call this show Cisco iOS version of routers. And then the iOS command that we're going to use. We'll just do the command show version pipe to include version. We'll register the output, and then that was our first play for this. And then the second play is going to be to return the output. So this is going to be print display the version output. So let's look at the whole playbook. We see that we're going to show the uptime of the Cisco iOS routers. Then the second thing we're going to do is show the Cisco iOS version of the routers as well. So let's go ahead and give this second, let's say print, the task where we're going to do is print display the uptime output, and then the second one's going to be print display version output. Okay, so let's go ahead and run the playbook again, see if this, well, it looks like we have a problem here. That's good. So this gives us a chance to troubleshoot our playbook, see what we did wrong. And if we scroll, let's see what we did wrong here. Okay, well, I don't see, let's go ahead and cancel out of here. I'm going to go ahead and pause it real fast. See if we can figure out what's going on. Okay, I think I found the problem. Let's go ahead and take a look at, as you can see, everything is indented at the S with the dash, and as you can see in the actual file, the playbook, we lost the indentation. So let's go ahead and move that. See if that fixes everything. So very important that everything kind of lines up. Name iOS register, let's check that. Name iOS register, that's all looks good. Name debug var, that looks good. And then name iOS register. This looks like it needs another space. And then name debug var. Okay, so that looks right. Let's go ahead and save this. And we'll go ahead and try to run this again. Let's do a clear. And we'll go ahead and run the playbook again. Okay, now it looks like it's working. So what this should show us is the uptime of each router and also the version that each router is, the iOS version of each router. So that's it. Looks good. We've got multiple plays going on. The first one is going to be displaying the output of the uptime of all three routers. And then the second successful play is going to be showing us the versions of all three devices. The iOS software, that is. And so that's it. You can keep adding if you want more. Then there's ways to basically format these playbooks so that the output is more condensed, and we'll show you how to do that in other labs when we make those available. But with this playbook, what we're able to get back is the uptime of all three routers. And then we're also able to see the software version. So as you can see, as a network engineer administrator, you can use you could use Ansible to automate these types of commands so that you can output these wherever you need them inside of your network monitoring tools or a file or wherever you want to export this data. But Ansible allows us to easily get this information by creating a simple playbook and inventory file where we put some of these variables and information into, and then it outputs it for us so that we can have this information to use to determine if you're a security engineer or a network engineer and you need to upgrade code for devices. You can use Ansible to not only show you the current version of software that you're running, but also help you with the deployment. We can show you how to do that in some other videos using Ansible. And then also if you're a network operator or somebody who's looking at, did we just lose a device on the network? Let's run a quick Ansible script automation and see, okay, routers 1, 2, and 3, they've been up for 3 hours. Okay, what happened 3 hours ago? So that's basically how to create a playbook. And there's other ways you can write plays so that they're shown together. And I do this in this lab as well. I can show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm talking about here is how we have a lot of information being displayed from Ansible in multiple tasks. What we can do is simplify this down to show less output in our playbook when the playbook is run. So let's go into the playbook and we'll follow along with our step-by-step guide. If we go into our playbook, what we'll do is we'll edit this quickly just to show you. So instead of having multiple outputs, we're just going to have one output for all of our commands that we run. So we'll do our show commands first, and then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to print and display that output. So we'll go ahead in our file. We'll go ahead and get rid of this. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll do show uptime. We'll do that. We'll do show iOS. And then our register, we're going to have, we'll just name them output 1 and output 2. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to have multiple vars here. We'll do output 1 and then output 2, std out lines. And so this helps kind of compress our playbook a little smaller, and then also compresses the execution and the output of that playbook. So let's just double check, make sure that it matches up. Output 1 is going to be for the uptime, output 2 is going to be for the Cisco iOS version, and then we'll have those displayed. Okay, everything looks good. Let's go ahead and save this file. And let's go ahead and run the playbook again. So you can see the play is going to be my first Cisco playbook, show how long the router's been up, but we're also going to show you what version each router is. So you can see the tasks that are running, show Cisco iOS version of routers, everything is okay, and the uptime. So the print output now shows R1, 2, and 3, they have been compressed, whereas before there was a lot more output. We now see everything in the same statement. So we have the R3 uptime is 3 hours and 12 minutes. Then we also have the version showing for R3. And so what this helps us do is condense our playbook down. So some people may like it like this, where it's condensed. Some people may like it where there's multiple tasks and you have that information kind of segregated. But some people might like it together. So it's really up to you, however you want to view the output of, your Ansible playbooks. And one last thing we want to show you is the IP address assigned to the router in which we are connecting to for verification. So we'll just add one more task under this playbook, and that's going to be the show IP interface brief pipe to include 00. And if we go back to one of our routers, we have fast Ethernet 00 and 01. Those are the only two interfaces. So we can use this to identify, and that is the IP address that we have for listed in our network configuration. So 200 is R1, 201 is R2, and 202 is R3. So we can go back here into our Ansible controller. We'll go back into the file, go back into the playbook, and we'll just add one more task. And we'll just call it show IP address of the router. We're going to call the iOS command module, and then the command we're going to use which if we go back, it's just going to be show IP interface brief pipe to include 00. And then we're going to just register this as output 3. And then we'll go down to our print display. And we're going to add this at the end. So we'll just do output 3 std out lines. And that should be it. Let's go ahead and save this. And then we'll go ahead and run the playbook one last time, and that'll be the end of the lab. So our tasks that are working are show the uptime of the Cisco iOS routers. Then the second task, show iOS version of the routers. And then the last task is going to be the show IP address of the router. And then the last task is going to be to output all of that information for us. And so for router 3, we see R3 uptime is 3 hours and 15 minutes. We see the Cisco iOS software version that we want. And then we also, the last thing we see here is the IP address. So let's go ahead and condense this so you can see this a little better. So R3, you now see the IP address of 202. R1, that should be 200. And last but not least is R2, which is 201. So that's it. We've created a simple playbook that performs multiple tasks. We have 3 show commands, one to show the iOS version, one to show the system uptime, and then one to show the IP address so we can verify that R3, the IPs that we have on all of our devices. And then the last task is to output all that information for us. So that's it. I want to thank you for joining us for the Ansible GNS3 Lab Setup Part 2. This was a continuation of Part 1, where we showed you how to install Ansible. We explained the Ansible Inventory, how to configure the inventory. We also showed you Ansible variables, how to configure those as well. And then the last thing we did was to show you the configuration of an Ansible playbook and how to run that playbook against multiple Cisco devices. So this step-by-step guide is going to be included in the video. It's on, just follow the GitHub link and you can run this lab as well and practice setting up your first Ansible playbook. So I want to thank you again for watching. and I hope to see you in the next video.